everyone, and welcome to today's Wildcard Wednesday, Barriers to EV Adoption and Proactive Actions You Can Take. Really glad you could join us today to learn what you can do while waiting to implement your electric vehicle program. My name is Sue Miller, and I am a Senior Program Manager here at Geotab and your host for today's expert session. So I'm excited to introduce our speaker today. It's Emma Gold-Udding, Team Lead in the EV Solutions Engineering team. Emma is an electrification, fleet planning, and sustainability subject matter expert with significant experience in developing plans that support electrification and working with early EV adopters. Emma, the floor is yours.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Sue. So just a quick session roadmap for us today. We're going to be talking generally about EV adoption, and then we're going to go into the three big barriers that we see. So these are EV availability, range concerns, higher capital costs. We're going to briefly touch on what we do if you do have an EV, and then get into the main meat and potatoes of I can electrify, what now? So to start us off, let's quickly just talk about EV adoption and what exactly the purpose is. In my experience, what I'm often seeing in terms of EV adoption is that the purpose is twofold. The first is to reduce those greenhouse gas emissions or carbon emissions from the fleet. And the second is often to reduce the operating expense of the fleet. I think we can all say that everybody probably is feeling budget cuts these days, especially in terms of, with the rising costs of gasoline and other things. So a lot of people these days are actually looking to electrification to have a more predictable operating cost stream and a lot lower of an operating cost as well. With those two simple goals, what are the barriers that are actually stopping people? So the three that we're going to talk about today are EV availability, range concerns, and higher capital costs. EV availability. I feel like I'm taking everybody down a rabbit hole here, but EV availability can be split into two different things as a barrier. The first is vehicle class, and the second is lead times. So in terms of vehicle class, there is a real struggle in the electric vehicle market right now where larger vehicles that need to go further distances, such as long-haul trucking, there aren't a lot of available options out there today. If you're looking to electrify something smaller, your compact vehicles that are in the fleet pool, for example, you have tons of options on the market. So this could be a huge barrier for actually jumping in, is if the needs for your fleet are in that medium to heavy duty range, there just aren't options out there for you today. That being said, I did want to call out that the biggest market disruptor is coming at the end of this year and beginning next model year. So the electric pickup truck options are finally here. I'm very excited about this. We have the Cybertruck, the F-150 Lightning. Both of those are coming to market and have blown away kind of all expectations of what those trucks could be. So that leads me into the second part of EV availability, which is lead times. Oftentimes, when a fleet is buying a new vehicle, it's because they require the new vehicle and they require it immediately. Waiting for the vehicle to be produced and delivered is much longer for an electric vehicle as opposed to a conventional vehicle. So this does create that barrier. It means oftentimes fleets are having to do longer planning cycles, understanding that it could be, 6 months to a year before they're seeing that vehicle on their lot, and having to bring forward those decisions into different budget years, as opposed to what they would do on a conventional side. The other barrier that I will say here, just quickly, is that EV models by region can also be an issue, especially if you happen to live in a CARB state. You will have a lot more vehicle selection available to you than if you live in a non-CARB state. The second full barrier here is range concerns. How far can an electric vehicle go? I think absolutely everybody who's listening to this has probably felt this inside, where they're trying to potentially look at electrification, and just the understanding of how far you can actually go on that vehicle becomes a point of concern. In the last 7 years, that range has increased exponentially almost. We're seeing, for a full-size vehicle, the average range is now 466 kilometers, which is pretty far, but there is still some fleets out there who do need a longer range than that. Fleets who aren't always coming back to a home base, fleets who don't have predictable duty cycles. There can still be a lot of issue here, especially in terms of availability of charging infrastructure if they are out and about. The great news is the average range is only expected to continue increasing. So if it doesn't work for you today, I can guarantee in the future it will work for you. Then the final barrier here is higher capital costs. So once again, this can be split into two categories: higher MSRPs of the initial purchase of the vehicle, and then also the hidden infrastructure costs. Electric vehicles, if you go to a dealership today, they have a higher price tag than their conventional counterparts. By 2025, for light-duty vehicles, that cost is expected to be about equal with a conventional vehicle, which is fantastic news for anybody in a light-duty fleet situation. However, that isn't true today, and it is especially not true on the medium heavy-duty markets. This increased upfront cost can be a huge blockade to electrifying today, especially if you are already feeling those budget squeezes. And if you're not going to get the same usage out of the vehicle, you might end up in a situation where you're paying to go electric as opposed to being able to save money. For some fleets, that's a great situation. They're prioritizing those carbon reductions, so they are willing to pay that premium to get the vehicle in to be able to reduce those carbon emissions and greenhouse gas emissions. For others, that's not an option. It is just that huge blockade that stops them from electrifying today. The second increased capital cost here is the infrastructure costs. Fleets in general only do charging at their own private infrastructure. Very rarely do we see fleets utilizing public charging infrastructure. So if a fleet is starting their electrification journey today, the cost of that infrastructure has to be within their understanding. This can often mean it has to come out of a facilities budget. Depending on where you're currently working, if your business is going to be there long term, it might not make sense to electrify right now if you know you're going to be moving in 18 months, for example. So there's a lot of different factors here that have to be understood. And though electric utilities often have fantastic programs to be able to support this and incentivize the cost of the charging station as well, it is important to understand that this can be cost prohibitive for some fleets, and it might take a few budget cycles before they're able to afford this, before they're able to start that electrification journey. So as a quick side note, if you're on this call and you have an EV, what now? All of the questions that we just previously covered are things that we highlight in the Electric Vehicle Suitability Assessment add-in by Geotab. In that, we tell you exactly why a vehicle is not able to go electric today, so you're able to hold that back for your planning and understand kind of the capabilities you would need to see in an electric vehicle before potentially bringing that vehicle back into an electrification discussion. That being said, if you have an electric vehicle, if you have one today, if you're fully electric today, I did want to just quickly mention that we do have that full suite of tools to be able to manage the three big problems all fleets with electric vehicles face. The first being ensuring that those vehicles are plugged in, the second being managing those range concerns, and the third, doing that cost reporting and monitoring. For anybody electrifying who wants to understand if that's actually reducing their operating costs and if they're actually saving those greenhouse gas emissions or carbon emissions, the cost reporting and monitoring is key to being able to do that and to be able to report back on the success. These can then all inform kind of potential other barriers that need to be removed to electrify more of the fleet as well. So if we've gotten all the way through this presentation and you're thinking to yourself, yes, Emma, that is 100% what is happening to me right now. I can't electrify, but I'm still tasked with reducing greenhouse gas emissions or carbon emissions for my fleet and reducing my operating budget. What can you do? So the first thing to understand is that Geotab sees both of those goals as being such a key part of fleet sustainability. And that fleet sustainability is much, much larger than just electrification. Electrification is included in this diagram. It's under alternative fuels. It's not only electric that it has to be your option. We do also have CNG, biodiesel, other things like that that actually have a lower carbon footprint than their traditional counterparts. The next thing that you could potentially do is look for car sharing opportunities, implement policies, monitor and train, and then finally recycle, recycle, recycle. Where you can, definitely be looking to switch things out, recycle those oils, batteries, and reduce that waste overall as well. The journey to fleet sustainability, this is just a great slide here that actually talks about how Geotab is supporting this as a larger function. So the first thing we encourage people to do is understand that fleet performance. It's all fantastic to go out there and say, I'm going to reduce my greenhouse gas emissions or my carbon emissions. But without understanding where you are today, you can't make that smart goal for yourself. You might say that you want to reduce it by 60 tons of carbon emissions, but if your fleet isn't producing that much today, that 60 is going to be a lot harder to come by. So we encourage everybody to understand that fleet performance. Look at the fuel consumption, look for the fuel efficient driving behaviors, understand the idling. And then once you have that set up is when we encourage people to act on the data or the insights. Start to understand exactly what changes you can make to your fleet to actually start achieving those goals, whether it's route optimization, fleet right sizing, driver coaching through the form of anti-idling policies, vehicle maintenance, or I've mentioned a lot in this presentation, electrification. Then finally, once you have those policies in place is when we're here to help you optimize those fleet operations. Leveraging that data and analytics as well as machine learning insights for intelligent decision making, you're going to be able to eliminate unnecessary waste. And we fully support you as you're operating in that mixed fleet support. So to really summarize my point there, the best way to hit both of these goals is by reducing that fuel usage overall. So how can you understand, act, and optimize? The biggest thing that we always encourage is anti-idling programs. Sure, there's not too much fuel used during idling. However, your emissions being put into the world when that vehicle is not actually in use. I'm not talking about kind of the idling at stoplights and things like that. But if you do have people, leaving their vehicles on because they're going inside to grab a coffee, for example, that's the sort of idling that can be reduced and have a huge impact on reducing your carbon emissions overall. The second thing we recommend doing is implementing carpool incentives. Have fleet pool vehicles available. Encourage people in your workplace to potentially work remotely if they can. Pick up their colleagues. It not only helps with that employee morale of enjoying each other's companies and forming those friendships that make for great team dynamics, but it does reduce that carbon footprint for you overall as well. The third thing we recommend is, I think there's a really great push for electrification. However, that shouldn't overlook the fact that if you are driving around in, a 2002 Saturn today, that replacing that with any vehicle that's a 2021 model year would see a lot of increased gains in efficiency from that vehicle. So looking to replace those older vehicles so they're running more fuel efficient again, and then reducing the vehicle size where possible. I know there's a lot of people who are very attached to their trucks. I'm very partial to the F-150 myself. However, unless that is needed for a job function, this can be a really great way to reduce the amount of emissions because the emissions coming from a sedan are going to be much less than coming from a truck. Then finally here, we do recommend looking for efficient routing. So there's always going to be issues that can pop up as we do routes, but you want to make sure that whatever the route is that you're taking is actually going to be the most efficient for that vehicle. And that can also help then reduce that fuel usage, and in turn, those greenhouse and carbon emissions. So overall, Geotab understands and recognizes that fleets need help and support as they want to reduce those carbon and greenhouse gas emissions. For any of the topics that I've covered today, please feel free to reach out to the 3 emails on the screen now. And I did also just want to call out that Geotab has recently signed the Climate Pledge, which aims to have Geotab be net zero carbon by 2040. So this is really exciting, and we're really happy to be able to do this. A lot of it is focused on our supply chain and helping our supply chain become greener overall. But we are always here and happy if anybody else would like to sign on to this Climate Pledge to support with that as well. And now time for questions.
That was really great, Emma. I really appreciate your presentation. And we do have a couple of questions that came through. One of the universal ones, I know this is something I always struggle with, is how do drivers know where to find charging stations for their vehicles?
Yeah, so there's a few different ways. A lot of electric vehicles actually have it fully built into the smarts of the vehicle. It'll have a GPS window up, and then it will show you where the nearest charging stations are. I've had to use that a few times in my personal electric vehicle, and we do not pay for a subscription at all. The other way to do it is there are great sites such as PlugShare, where you're able to go in and actually see all the charging stations around you and then filter it to the type of charging station that you need. So potentially for myself, if I'm out and about and need a charge, I only look at the DC fast chargers because I only want to spend, 20 minutes getting lunch and then be on my way again. So there's lots of resources like that that are easily pulled up on a phone to be directed to.
You just said something that will, tie into this other question that somebody asked is, are charging stations universal? Meaning, can the charging stations be used by any electric vehicle?
Generally, yes. The only real exception to that is the Tesla supercharger network, which right now is for Tesla only. Elon Musk has recently said, I believe yesterday, that he's looking to open that up to help encourage further electrification across the globe. But those ones can only be used by Teslas. Teslas do come with an adapter to be able to use the other ones, though.
Well, and charging stations seems to be on everybody's mind here. So what information is available on increasing the infrastructure for charging stations?
I'll answer that in 2 ways. So the first, I would recommend everybody go and look at the Electrify America project. That is a project that was set up with the Volvo emission scandal $1 billion, where they're actually creating fast charging networks that are very future-proof. So they're installing chargers across corridors in the United States for charging at a 500 kilowatt rate to facilitate long haul trucking and other things like that. So they're kind of putting what I would call like the chicken before the egg, and they're starting to ensure that everything being installed is going to be future proof. On a fleet side, my team, the EV Sol Eng team, can definitely help anybody looking to electrify. We can help understand where those dwell locations are. We can tell you how long those vehicles are dwelling for, and then also put you in touch with different partnerships that we're establishing. So if you have a fleet that does need support in this, we're more than happy to help.
Excellent, thank you. On the recycling part, have there been any studies done on the disposal of batteries from EVs?
Yeah, 90% of the battery from an electric vehicle is fully recyclable. So that means it's a lot less waste into the world than your lithium-ion battery from your phone, for example. That being said, there is a lot going on right now in terms of understanding second life potential for these lithium-ion batteries from the vehicles. They're looking at potentially using them as solar storage. There's huge solar farms going up kind of, across all the sunny places, so not where I'm located. Using the batteries as a second life because they're still able to store a huge amount of kilowatt hours. Also sending them to up and coming developing countries where they're being refactored to actually help the electrification of motorcycles and things like that. So lots of different things kind of up in the air right now in terms of second life of the battery. But if a second life is not appropriate, 90% of it can be recycled.
That's awesome. Another question here, pretty specific area here. Any contacts in San Antonio, Texas, as far as recommended installers of EV charging stations?
I don't have any specific recommendations, but if you reach out, I can definitely see who I can find in my network.
We do have one more question. Can you speak to the Geotab electric vehicle suitability assessment and how that would help?
Absolutely. The electric vehicle suitability assessment is a tool developed by Geotab that looks at the real world performance of electric vehicles and then using your telematics data understands whether or not that electric vehicle would work as a replacement for the vehicle that's operating today. So we're not just, taking whatever the sticker number is and telling you yes, no. We are looking at the real data that Geotab has collected from these electric vehicles, doing a variety of different duty cycles, drive cycles, and then we're able to accommodate for weather as well to tell you whether or not it's going to fit. The other nice thing that the electric vehicle suitability assessment does is when you start an assessment, it asks what country you're in. Because I'm located in Canada, the vehicles that we have here and available is a lot less than you're able to get in the United States. And if you're located in Europe, a completely different kettle of fish again. So we have it by country availability for you. So you're able to select and then only see vehicles that are actually there and able for you to purchase. The other great thing is we don't force you to look at every single electric vehicle. If you are a fleet that is Buy American only, you can definitely choose the option to only look at the electric vehicles available today from American brands. So the great thing about this report is it does tell you the potential operating savings as well as the carbon emission savings. It then also, if there is no electric vehicle fit today, will tell you exactly why. So you're able to understand at what point that vehicle could potentially be electrified in the future.
Excellent. And a follow-up question to that is, who would I work with to perform the EV assessment?
Depending upon your fleet size, it's something you can add into your own database and run there, or you can work closely with your reseller or with the EV solutions engineering team.
Okay, and your contact information you provided, so they would know who to reach out to. And then I think this might be our last question. Are there still government incentives to acquire EVs?
Depending upon your location, yes. They are becoming less and less popular just as the rate of electrification is increasing and as OEMs have put pledges in place to be fully electric by X date, we're seeing incentives drop off just because those are kind of only the options out there for people. That being said, there are other incentives out there and available, especially if you're in California. Low carbon fuel credits are there, which is also a very powerful thing to be able to trade for. So definitely slightly moving away from what we were considering as a traditional incentive, but it does unlock other things for you.
Awesome. Well, that was our last question. And Emma, I got to thank you again for sharing your expertise and also to everyone on the call for your engagement and the great questions. So until next time, I'm Sue Miller, and on behalf of myself and everyone here at Geotab, thank you for joining us today. We'll see you all next time. Same Geotab time, same Geotab channel.